which brings us quite naturally to RIF, actually, and this initiative that we just heard about. And I'd like to ask Judy, it's certainly, there's no silver bullet for the problem that David just talked about, even though science seems to be a good entry point because it's seen as with less cultural baggage, so to say, in terms of your career path. But your initiative is interesting, Full Steam Ahead, is having a theory of action behind it that you seem to be very proud and very convinced is of help, particularly to those families. And I'd like you to reflect a little bit about what this looks like.
I wish Dr. Mayberry was here because he could talk to this so beautifully. So I'm going to be a poor substitute for Claude Mayberry. But I will tell you, so my own background, you hear I'm very, very Southern. I had a mother and a daddy who both had college degrees, who both had 2 degrees actually. But we lived in these small Tennessee towns. My father was a Methodist minister. And some did not have libraries. And of course we had books in the home, but even in our schools, we didn't have libraries. We had little blue biographies in our classrooms. I read every one of the little blue biographies that were about women. Children want to see themselves in literature. I didn't want to read any of the things about the men. You want to see yourself. You want to see people who look like you do, who have, this is kind of a bad term, or it may sound like a bad term, casual diversity. You don't, if you are in a wheelchair, if you have certain handicaps, you don't want somebody to make over that. You want to see yourself in a classroom with other children who may or may not have those different handicaps. I'm so proud of RIF because years ago they made the commitment based on the NAEP scores and based on what we know about children in poverty that we would focus on African American children, Hispanic children, American Indian children, and also males in reading. If you disaggregate, you take apart those NAEP scores and you look at who really has issues, those 3 particular populations, and then our males. So my background is English. My PhD is in, I did my dissertation on Appalachian college students. And they had an average ACT of 7. And my daddy said, do those people like walk and talk and breathe like everybody else? And yes, but they were from Appalachia, serious poverty, unaccredited schools, teachers teaching out of field in the 80s. Well, those populations, people want to see themselves in print. So what we've done, and if you've been teaching as long as I have, in the old days we called it teaching in the content area. So you would do reading, writing, listening, speaking, and viewing in the content area. I so admire what you do with language. Language is the vehicle. There are 7,500 languages in the world. Language is the vehicle, and you can teach things with language. So vocabulary. Educators talk about Tier 3 vocabulary. Tier 3 vocabulary is content specific. So a word like Appomattox, for example, you would find in Tier 3. Well, you just as well find the science vocabulary, the math vocabulary. That Tier 3 vocabulary is going to be about or within books that have a science content. But for families in poverty and families who have not themselves attained the kind of educational background that perhaps they would like, RIF is able to help them pick out the books, give support. I hope when you leave, you'll look in your folders, because in your folders, you'll see these wonderfully designed activities that have been designed by an expert team. They're beautiful. It doesn't say, parent, you can't read, so this is for you. It's just written in a simple, lovely way. It has a vocabulary scaffold. You'll get these on the way out, and I hope that you look at them, because they're for parents and they're for community groups, they're for teachers, but they feature the STEAM content written in a way that's appropriate for educators, but also for parents and for community groups. So many of our parents don't even know the vocabulary. We look at our nape stores, and as we look at these especially the little ones, if you don't know what numerator means, or you don't know what denominator means, it's the simple vocabulary that hurts you, even on word problems. I have worked in my career a lot with international teachers and international children, and I was myself a student at the University of Madrid. There's nothing more frustrating than knowing how to say something in your first language and not being able to say it in a second, and not only not being able to say it, but to say miserably embarrassing, insulting things to other people, and you don't even know that you're doing it. So that the language is so important. And then our books, we have our 40 books in this collection. We have those back at the back, and I hope you'll look at them too, because that's the way you set a context. I have a really good friend who is a New York Times best-selling author. Her name is Sharon McCrum, and she typically writes about Appalachia. But she tells a wonderful story that her publisher told her about a British author in the 40s who was trying to write Westerns. He was very interested in Westerns. That was all the rage. So, and he had read a bunch of Westerns. So he prepared a text, sent it to a publisher, and it was about the coyotes flying above. You gotta know the word. Yeah, coyote, that's in a lot of Westerns, but coyotes don't fly above. So what Riff has tried to do is to choose materials that will set a context, teach different subjects in the content area through the beauty of books, make those books, the best books, Aristotle said this, there's nothing new. Aristotle said it just about all. Aristotle said, you learn by hooking onto a storyline. He said it more beautifully and in Greek. But so many of our books back there, they might be about animals, but animals who are friends. We have a wonderful book back there by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. If you're old, you remember him as Lou Alcindor. Boys love that book, and it's all about inventors, African American inventors. Sometimes through our history, we don't know that other groups actually did inventions, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that RIF is trying to do, if you work with school teachers that, like I do and like my team does, our children don't know about careers. One of the reasons, the president says cradle to career, our children don't know about careers. So often our poor children don't have families who have careers. They work, but we hope, but they don't necessarily have careers. And so when I was working in Kentucky, I have worked a lot with adult literacy, adult new readers. And they tell us that 43% of our population, which is 46%, which translates into 93 million grown people, have trouble with reading and writing. So, you try to help the family, but the family has its own troubles. Well, what we know about careers is children don't know how to set up their path because they don't know what careers are. When I was in Kentucky working with the Kentucky Literacy Commission, and we were interviewing various people at a plant in eastern Kentucky, well, we had people who wanted to be nurses. Why do you want to be a nurse? Because I watched General Hospital and there are nurses. Now that's sad, but they didn't see those models. And so what's so wonderful about those books is you see careers in there, you've got the Tier 3 vocabulary, these materials are available for free for teachers and for parents. And so Riff thought, you can do so many things with a book. So why wouldn't you choose this initiative? And of course it's inspired by the need to create science and math and engineers and technologists. Also the cradle to career, but also we just need to teach people how to read. And there's no reason to read something that's terribly miserable when you can read something wonderful and exciting like our 40 books.
Thank you. So this is going to be a double question. I'll begin with Steve and come back to Judy. You've just heard, so you talked about, the end of the pipeline, there's a certain kind of sense that you know, it needs to be meaningful, it needs to be connected to some real problems, you need to break down the boundaries sometimes of disciplines, unleash the creativity of people, free them to be kind of thoughtful, maybe even non-routine problem solvers in cybersecurity and not just following orders and so on and so forth. So there's an ideal group of people coming out of the pipeline. We heard from David about the input of the pipeline, and we heard something very interesting about science and technology potentially and engineering and mathematics being an equalizer in the sense that it doesn't have the cultural and other kinds of barriers to come in. It's more of a meritocracy. It doesn't matter how you look in science, it seems. And there's actually data that supports that. It's a great way to compensate for a family background that if you want to go to the Harvard Club may not be as easy. So my question to you is, if it's so important for the end of the pipeline to stack the beginning of the pipeline in an increasingly more diverse United States, to make sure that groups who traditionally not entered these, to increase the number of people, what is the role of businesses, the private sector, given that the public sector increasingly cuts, cut, that's what we hear. What is the role of business in fostering not only the end of the pipeline, but the beginning of it? And I would call it pathways. What would you say? And I know we haven't talked about this as a question.
No, it's fine. So there is an organization called Change the Equation, who many of you are probably familiar with, which is driven by the Obama White House. And when I was at the Gates Foundation, I helped form that organization. And I think one of the principles by which Change the Equation is trying to operate is to identify comfort zones for business to engage with school districts, individual schools, teachers. It's often that you have this sort of phenomenon of what we sometimes call drive-by outreach, you know, where companies or others, you know, with all good intentions, try to support local schools or districts or even regional and national, but often these aren't pulled together, the dots aren't connected in a meaningful way. So I think that's a kind of, that's a great need that is out there. Business is committed in many ways. I would say there's more business engagement in K-12 than higher education, in fact, but I think it's the coherence of the vision. And I think the Common Core Standards provides a really super opportunity for business in states or nationally to sort of get behind a movement there. But I think for business, it's often, you know, it's often very localized without a broader sort of vision behind it. And I think that's where RIF could have a major role, is to help sort of show how different sectors, different players in this space could come together in a meaningful and a productive way.